The Eastern Conference seems there for the taking, at least except for the Boston Celtics. Why the Orlando Magic and New York Knicks are two teams to watch today on Locked On Magic.
You are Locked On Magic, your daily Orlando Magic podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And you are indeed Locked On Magic. Today is September 8th. It will be September 9th, 2024. My name is Philip Rossman-Reich. I'm the senior writer over at OrlandoMagicDaily.com. Of course, follow me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. On today's episode of Locked On Magic, like we did in our last episode with the Miami Heat, we're going to talk with Gavin Schall of Locked On Knicks, chat a little bit about where the Magic and Knicks sit in the Eastern Conference pecking order, which one of these teams are eager to take the next step to challenge Boston Celtics, and how these two teams match up ahead of their big their big NBA Cup game on December 3rd. It's a little ways away from now, but it'll be here before you know it. We'll get to all that coming up here in just a moment. But first, we want to thank you again for making Locked On Magic part of your day every day, no matter when you listen to us, whether it's first thing in the morning, whether it's right when we upload. We truly appreciate you making Locked On Magic part of your day every day. Remember, there's a great Locked On podcast covering every single team in the NBA. Just search for Locked On and the team you're looking for, the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Magic is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We are officially now, let's count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks away from the opening of training camp. September 30th is media day, October 1st, the beginning of training camp. So we are counting down the days, and we're going to do a lot of NBA preview coming up here over the next couple of weeks. Now is the time to make sure you're subscribed every day to Locked On Magic. If you missed our last episode, I chatted with David Ramil and Wes Goldberg of Locked On Heat to get us set for not only the opening game of the season, but really what's going to be a very competitive race for the Southeast Division Championship. As we all know, the Miami Heat are not dead until you kill them. But the Orlando Magic are absolutely in a different class of team right now. The Magic are one of those teams that are considered one of the up-and-coming teams in the league. They may not yet be in the contender tier. If you listen to most of the pundits, you'll hear them say that, the Celtics are far and away the best team in the East. Not going to debate that. Defending champs, they are pretty much set for a little bit of a run here. Then you get your next group of the veteran teams like the Philadelphia 76ers, who just added Paul George, the Milwaukee Bucks, who you still have to respect with Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard, even though they are starting to get a little bit older. And then you have a team like the New York Knicks, a team that burst their way into the East last year as the 2 seed, mind you, and added Mikal Bridges this year as another boost to their offense and their defense. The Knicks are a very, very real team. And really, I don't know if we could call them young because they're a little bit older, Jalen Brunson, Julius Randle. But the Knicks, Pacers, Magic, and maybe the Cavs are really kind of the wild cards of this season coming up for the Eastern Conference. So Gavin Schall, our friend over at Locked On Knicks, is kind of bouncing around all the Eastern Conference contenders, which the Magic are one. And so I went on Locked On Knicks and thus on Locked On Magic to discuss how the Magic and Knicks match up and what their prospects are for the upcoming season.
All right, guys, as promised, lucky enough to be joined by my buddy, Philip Rossman-Reich of the Locked On Magic podcast. I don't know if there's a reason for this, Philip. I feel like I've done maybe more crossovers with you than any other Locked On host. It's up there between you and the old Cavs guys, but you're an old friend to this show. Welcome back. I'm excited to talk to you. I'm excited, unless they knock the Knicks out of the playoffs. I'm excited about the Magic this year, so I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the East, there are a lot of teams to be excited about in the East. And I think as far as like fan excitement for the upcoming season, the Magic, the Knicks, probably the Pacers are probably like the 3 most like teams that are just like, let's just get this thing going. There's so much optimism and so much hope about what this season can mean for these franchises. It's gonna be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to these 82 games.
I agree with that. And I was going to say like maybe Philly should be in there, but there's just some existential
It's
angst
Philly.
there.
Philly fans are incapable of feeling joy until they're lifting the trophy. And even then, I don't know if they're really that happy. They're just like, well, you got to do it again. We're Philly.
There's just too much self-loathing. And to any Philly fans listening, maybe there's one or
We
two.
love you guys.
I want to also say I would typically put Knicks fans in that category, but I feel like the way this Knicks team has been appreciated, this is a total tangent, but I appreciate very meta. I appreciate the way the Knicks team is appreciated, right? Even when they don't win the championship, even when they go out in the second round, like Knicks fans, I think appreciate the grit, appreciate the fight. I think Sixers fans, and I think rightfully, I think this is almost the curse of having someone as talented as Joel Embiid. You like rightfully say like, why the F have we not made a conference finals? And like, that's totally fair. And with the Knicks, maybe it's just because Jalen Brunson's like kind of a cute little guy, as incredibly talented as he is. It's like, wow, like we did this. And obviously, though, the expectations are high for the Knicks. We are playing for a championship this year. That's what happens when you trade 5 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges. Orlando certainly has that type of talent. I don't think guys are quite at that point in your trajectory yet where you're quote unquote all in. Still have all their picks to trade. I think still have plenty of cap flexibility down the road. Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner are still unbelievably young. Wagner in particular, for someone who felt like he's been in my life for like 7 years, is somehow still like 23. Like it's insane. I think he's maybe going backwards. But anyways, I say all that to say, Philip, is there a world where Orlando's time comes a little bit early, like Oklahoma City last year or Oklahoma City 10 years ago? I'm not that creative in coming up with non-Oklahoma City examples of this, but could Orlando be a little bit early and shock everyone? And you look at the end of the season, you're like, oh my God, they won 55 games and they're the 2 seed in the East.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's absolutely a world because it felt like, honestly, last year the Magic arrived a year early. Like, it feels like they're a year ahead of schedule as far as the wins and the expectations and what they're capable of doing. I mean, I've been, kind of in this bunker of defending my guy a little bit with Paolo Banchero, because it feels like there's nothing but criticism coming his way with his efficiency and all that stuff. And I was, I decided to like look at how other star players kind of grew, and everybody struggles in their first couple of years. And then they have that like big breakthrough. And then all of a sudden that's who they are. And that's kind of what the Magic are betting on with Paolo Banchero, is that he's going to have this superstar breakthrough where all of a sudden he is a perennial all NBA player. He's a perennial all-star, not just kind of a borderline guy. Like he was probably the last or second to last guy to get in last year. He and Franz Wagner are both very capable of having these massive breakthroughs. And that's really what the franchise is betting things on. It's why they gave Franz Wagner a max contract this summer, which again, doesn't kick in until next year. He's still on his rookie deal for one more year. This is a team that absolutely has that potential. They broke through last year in a meaningful way, and they definitely have another layer to go. And now that they've tasted the playoffs a little bit, it feels like they think they can get there.
I am totally with you on that. And I think there is just this rush to like, and part of it is just like the 24/7 news cycle. It's ESPN trying to fill time to just like crap on these guys. And like even Franz and and I was guilty of it. I came on the show. I was like, oh, you really want to give that guy a max contract? And I'm like thinking about it, like, no, screw that. Like he's 22 years old. He's like super long. You watch him on Germany. You're like, this guy's gonna take down Team USA.
Yeah,
like
you either believe in the guy or you don't. Like right. if you don't believe in him that he's that level, then you're probably thinking of moving on from him, which is a very bad decision.
And those guys they just do not like that big, that skilled, like his level of commitment. Like they just do not grow on trees. And like you could like go at him for, even though he had the one incredible game, but like you go at him for his performance against the Cavs. Look at Kobe freaking Bryant, how he struggled like when the Lakers were swept early in his career. Like LeBron, like his version of that was like he couldn't solve the 2007 Spurs relatively early in his career. And you can go on and on and on. And again, we were talking that is for like top 10 guys all time. For someone like Franz, who like is maybe more like, I don't know, like a 6-time All-Star, like totally reasonable. Paolo not being that efficient as the number one guy at 2021 last year in an offense that had shooting, but correct me if I'm off on this, I think was just inherently a little clunky just with like all the length on the floor. Like I think if you're on the Magic, you were bumping into one of your own teammates' limbs like every time you try to go to the rim. And for Paolo, whose like game is like obviously skill-based, but also like has a little bit of Julius Randle in him, and that he is just like a strong, giant freak of a human being. Like that is a challenging context. So I guess like specifically from a skill perspective, like to really excel, and Paolo certainly did at points, but like in those high stakes games in the playoffs in an Eastern Conference that, as we're going to get into, looks increasingly loaded at the top and increasingly tough to break through. Like, what is the next step for those guys kind of excelling in those moments?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is maturity. Like, like people forget how young this team was. It's Paolo's 21. Franz just turned 23 a couple of weeks ago.
That's insane. He should be 30.
Yeah, it's nuts. Like Jalen Suggs is 22, 23 now. Like this was last year the fourth youngest team in the league. They had two players, I think, older than 30 last year, and that was Gary Harris and Joe Ingles, and one of them's gone. I think KCP and Corey Joseph, I think, replaced them. So they got a little bit more experience, but like Corey Joseph isn't going to play. This is still a really, really young team. And the way I've kind of described this group was last year, they were just figuring out how to win. Like they'd never won before, and they were just enjoying the experience of winning. So now the question for this team is, okay, how do you mature? So how do you improve individually? How do you work better for your team? Like everyone talks about the turnovers, and Paolo averaged like 5 or 6 turnovers per game in the playoffs, because he had a lot of responsibility on his plate. And so now he's got to work to bring those turnovers down. I think the Magic actually were 28th or 29th in the league in turnover rate at 15%. Like they get a lot of it back because their defense is so good, but they've got to reduce those turnovers, get more shot opportunities. That's going to help their offense a ton as well. So it's just a little bit of maturity of how do you value each possession? How do you manage a season? How do you meet expectations? Because now, you don't have that kind of free card of figuring out how to win. Now you're proving you know how to win. So how do you do that again? And I think that's going to be the big step for this team this year is, yes, get better, but also maintain where you're at when things aren't going your way. And that's a really difficult thing for young teams to do, I think.
It's a weird question to ask, given that the team is so young and everyone should be on an upward trajectory. And KCP is someone who's very good at this. It
is a weird, sorry to interrupt, but it is a weird question to ask, but it's also like they're young enough that they should get better every year.
Yeah.
And, you get to a game 7 in the first round, the way you get better is you get to the second round. So they're it's fair to say like, hey, you got to hit this mark now.
Yeah, 100%. And where I was going with that was actually their defense, like third in the NBA last year. And I get the logical assumption would be like, all right, could they be 1 this year with KCP, with Jonathan Isaac, like is maybe like the best permanent defender in basketball this side of Wemby, like another year removed from those traumatic lower leg injuries. Paolo a year better, Franz a year better, all Jalen Suggs, who's just a monster, a year better. But I think sometimes defense year to year is a little tricky to project, because when you're really good one year, it is just hard to sustain that level of effort, of intensity and focus. And credit Jamal Mosley for getting that kind of buy-in for a young team. It is just like young teams don't defend well. Like that is typically the baseline. And Orlando, like I think where I have like that world where I agree with you, like that there is a really high ceiling here is like, that is like a freakish sign of potential in the same way, like that Oklahoma City team I referenced from 10 years ago. And the recent one I referenced like was so good on offense, the Kevin Durant version, so good on defense, the version last year, like that is a great sign for them. Do you think that sustains into next season?
Yeah, I think it will sustain, but I think it is election season. So you talk about your like paths to victory.
Yeah.
And, the Magic's path to victory last year was we're going to be so dominant on defense. It doesn't really matter how bad our offense is. But Jamal Mosley has said it this offseason, like the Magic aren't sneaking up on anybody anymore. Like they're not, that cutesy team or, a decade plus of teams thinking, we're coming into Orlando. It's no big deal. That's not the case anymore. Like teams know Orlando is a big deal. We've spent a good chunk of the offseason talking about how this team gets better, but also recognizing that this is a playoff team. Like this is a team that isn't, if they're only missing the playoffs if things go really wrong. And so now everyone has tape on them. Now everyone maybe game planning for them a little bit more. Maybe, let's be real. Everyone's human, focused on them a little bit more than they would have been otherwise. The Magic kind of worked in anonymity for certainly for the last decade, but last year even, no one was really paying attention to them in the national scope. And so now you have a few more eyeballs on you, and now teams are maybe taking your tape a little bit more seriously and taking your approach a little bit more seriously. They're not going to be shocked at your physicality, or they're going to be coming in prepared for your physicality. So I don't think it would be surprising if the Magic do take maybe a little bit of a step back defensively, but by the same token, they have a ton of defensive talent. They went out and they said, instead of trying to improve, fill these holes, we're just going to strengthen what we're already good at. Adding Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who got, I think, 12 votes for all defensive team last year with Jalen Suggs, with Jonathan Isaac, with Franz Wagner, who I think can also push to be on an all defensive team very, very soon. I don't think people talk enough about his defense, with Wendell Carter, who is a solid defender at the center position, if not an above the rim protector. The Magic have all these great defensive pieces. They have buy-in to what Jamal Mosley's preaching, and they know that's their formula to win. And so, they got to be that good again if they want to have the success they had last year. I think they know that.
All right, I have two more quick questions on Orlando, and then I want to hear your thoughts on the Knicks. What are your biggest questions about what the Knicks have to do to take an even further step? We'll get into all that next on Locked On Locked On Magic. There we go, and Locked On.
Let's take a quick break for our conversation with Gavin to tell you a little bit more about our friends over at FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel anytime. I know everyone is excited for the first week of the NFL season. I just finished watching the Jaguars just completely muff that game against the Miami Dolphins. My friend Brett James, who also covers the Magic, was texting me about Northwestern on Friday night and saying, yeah, this is like watching the Jags. I don't know how you do it all year. And I was like, yeah, I've been doing that for a decade. That's what it's like. But if you are more optimistic, FanDuel has you covered, because FanDuel actually really likes the Orlando Magic in a lot of ways. They've set their over-under at 47 wins. They have the Magic +1 for their opening night game against the Miami Heat, but the favorites to win the Southeast Division, if that matters at all. They're also among the kind of second tier of teams to win the Eastern Conference, coming in at +1,700. Those odds have shifted a little bit now. Cleveland actually now +1,600. They're 5th. Orlando now 6th in those odds at +1,700. So still a decent bet if you think the Magic are going to take that big leap. Just visit FanDuel.com to check out those odds and so much more. Download America's #1 sportsbook today. Before we move any further, I want to remind you all that you can check out all the great NBA action on Locked On NBA. Once you're done listening to Locked On Magic, check out Locked On NBA. There's no offseason in the NBA. We're coming up on the end of our offseason. We'll be back to 5 days a week next week. And Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, a couple of things to finish up on the Magic. How does KCP change their floor spacing this year? And how real was Jalen Suggs shooting last year? And how does it fit? Because to me, as much as like Paolo and Franz getting more skilled and continuing to improve and continuing to be more like battle testable to find this team, just their ability to consistently space the floor around those guys. And obviously Suggs making the shooting leap, like maybe you'd agree, maybe you disagree, probably the single biggest deal for Orlando last year, just completely transformed what that starting lineup could look like, allowed you to play him a ton of minutes to just be a total menace defensively. And then KCP just, very similar to the Knicks, doubling down on shooting and doubling down on defense with Mikal Bridges. Like, it feels like Orlando kind of did the same thing with KCP, especially if that was real from Suggs, and he can even up the volume this year.
Yeah, I think the general thought with KCP is let's the lineup last year with Jalen Suggs and Gary Harris in the backcourt, it wasn't impressive in the playoffs, especially because they were going up against Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland, but that lineup worked really well for them. So they went out and they said, let's just get a better version of Gary Harris. And that's obviously Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And, I think it's oversimplifying to call KCP a better version of Gary Harris, but at the very least, that's what he's going to provide the Magic. But like you said, I think the biggest factor for Orlando is that Jalen Suggs shoots that well again. If he was a 42% catch and shoot 3-point shooter last year, 39.9% overall after shooting like 29 and 32% his first 2 years. It was a major leap. I actually entered last season thinking Jalen Suggs wasn't going to start, that he was going to be the sixth man. I thought they'd go Markelle Fultz, Gary Harris, because the shooting was just so important. And we all assumed Markelle Fultz was going to be the starting point guard. Suggs being able to hit shots at a regular level opened up so much for the Magic's offense and opened up so much for the lineup possibilities, especially because Suggs, was healthy. I think he played 75 games last year, but was healthy and just destructive on defense, just completely terrorizing teams on defense. And so, again, my big theme for the Magic, and I think my listeners probably think I'm thinking too small on this, but my big theme for the Magic this year is you got to prove you can do it again. Like, yes, get better, but you got to be able to do everything you did last year again, first and foremost. And so Jalen Suggs, who is due for a new contract, hasn't signed as of recording. Maybe he will before the October 21st deadline. Maybe it waits till the summer. Jalen Suggs has a lot riding on having a second quality season like he did last year, where, that could be the difference between getting paid $26 million and $31 million. That 3-point shooting is such a huge factor. And for a Magic team that's not a good 3-point shooting team overall, that's going to be a big deal for them.
All right, final thing on the Magic. Where do you actually think they finish? Because I've had so much difficulty with this in that I think on paper, Knicks, Celtics, Sixers, like probably in their own class, just as regular season teams. Milwaukee could take the regular season lightly and still win 50 plus games potentially. Philly, obviously, you have the Embiid health factor. And then Indiana and Cleveland, I would probably project to be slightly better than Orlando. And yet, I think Orlando's floor is higher than maybe half those teams. I just feel like, weirdly enough, even though there's only a 1-year sample size, so maybe there's some regression there. But I just don't. I think they'll stay healthy. They're young, like not a lot of guys with major injury history outside of Isaac. And the other teams do have injury questions, and they do have consistency questions. They do have some depth questions. Where Orlando is just like they kind of are who they are, and it's a really good basketball team already.
Yeah, they know who they are, and I think that's their big advantage is they know what their identity is. They know their formula, and even when guys do miss time, like Wendell Carter has never played 60 games in any season of his career. Like you have to bet on him missing 20 games. Jonathan Isaac is having his first healthy summer since 2019, which is really exciting because the beginning of the 2020 season, he was ridiculously good. Like even offensively, he took some major steps. So I think we don't really know what we're going to get out of Isaac even. We know what we'll get out of him defensively, but offensively, he could have a major shift as well because he's still pretty young too. But I kind of see the East being very similar to what it was last year, where 2 through 7 are going to be decided by like 2 or 3 games. And, the difference between success or failure based on the standings could be, Paolo rolled his ankle and had to miss a week in January, or Franz, that's happened in the Magic last year. Franz missed a week and a half. The Magic struggled when he was out in early January. And that's when they kind of flatlined a little bit and fell to like 8th and had to pick up some ground again. That's going to be how these seasons turn. So I look at it we got to wait and see how the season plays out. But the Magic were sitting in the 2nd seed with a week to go in the season last year. They struggled that last week. They entered the last day of the season. They win, they're the 5 seed. They lose, they're the 8 seed. I very much see the same thing kind of happening this year, where it's a lot is going to be on the line in that last week of the season. And the Magic could be the 3 seed. They could surprise everyone, be the 3 seed. They could be in the play-in as the 7 seed hosting that 7-8 game. Like I think it's all very, very possible. And they could even do this with a better record. Like I truly think the Magic are a better team today than they were at the end of last season. But because so many players are still kind of exploring their games and allowed to make mistakes, to be honest, I think, they may lose a couple games here and there because of that. And that's going to cost them in the standings in a very tight Eastern Conference.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. What are your biggest questions about the Knicks heading into this year, or anything else you want to know?
Yeah, no. I think the Knicks are a really, really interesting team. I would say this era of the Knicks is kind of been defined by their restraint and by not going for the big shiny object. But what's your feeling on the Mikal Bridges deal? Is that something that you feel takes New York to that title contender, and was it worth the pretty substantial cost to get him?
So I've been saying this a lot this offseason. I think the value baked into that trade beyond Mikal Bridges, the player, and we can probably all agree, like a guy who's never made an all-star team, it's hard to justify the draft equity outload that the Knicks had in that trade. But it gives you a couple of things. It gives you Jalen Brunson at half price. Like that alone, I maybe 3 first-round picks, 4 first-round picks.
I think Jalen Brunson setting a trend. I think I not to interrupt too much here, but I think the trend in the league for a while now is going to be you get your big max. Teams are going to be willing to give big maxes to their rookie players. So like Franz Wagner getting a max, Paolo will get his max. Maybe Jalen Suggs gets overpaid. But on that second contract, that second and third contract, I think a lot of teams are going to be saying like, hey, you need to give us a little bit of a haircut on this. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to give you a championship team.
Yeah, I think it's even different with Jalen because he didn't get that. He got a big second contract. By Locked On podcast payment standards, he got very large contract, right? That's you got to get a lot of downloads to get that kind of money. But by NBA superstar standards, it was not that much money. It was like $100+ million, $110 million for Jalen Brunson. But you get to play with all your best friends, and to win a championship, that was worth it for him. So that's where Mikal inherently has a lot of value. And I think the Knicks at the time of the trade were banking on their ability to convince Isaiah Hartenstein to take a major discount and stay in New York. And by all accounts, who knows how true it is, they came pretty close to doing that. They ultimately could not make up the fact that he was going to make $12 million more per year and still get to compete for a championship. And maybe Orlando even had some latent interest there. But I think that is the rub in the ointment for him. Because I think with Hartenstein, I would put the Knicks. This is saying a lot because I think Boston is a generationally great team, and maybe as a proud Celtics hater, I and a lot of other people don't do a good enough job of saying that and reporting that. But I might have put the Knicks closer to the Celtics than anyone else, than being close to the Sixers or the Bucks if they kept Hartenstein. I think they would have been that good. I think they would have been a 60+ regular season win team, and I think there would just not be a lot of holes to poke at. Very similar to Boston. Now, I think there's some holes to poke at the center depth that can get worse with Mitchell Robinson's injury risk. And it's something I talked about on our last episode of Crossover with Locked On Cavs. But I think there are some pretty substantial spacing issues with Mitchell Robinson in for Isaiah Hartenstein with Julius Randle there. And that opens up some real questions to how do the Knicks get to their best lineups? How do they maximize spacing around Jalen Brunson? How do they do all that while still playing great defense? That were just a little bit cleaner a year ago when Hartenstein was on this team, even with Mikal Bridges, who is a guy who does all those things well. So I think he is great. I think he's going to be a fine fit. I just think it creates some questions given who went out and for unrelated reasons.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of my big question about the Knicks and why, I think they are in that upper tier of the Eastern Conference, just the offensive talent. We know, the vibes are good. We know the vibes are immaculate, as Jalen Brunson likes to say.
Thank you, Philip. You're now.
I was going to say earlier, if the championship was handed out on vibes alone, I think the Knicks and Magic would have been your finals matchup. Just because the vibes for both teams are just so good all year. But we know, they're like a Tom Thibodeau team. Everybody is just all bought into the whole Thibodeau attitude, even to the point of, Josh Hart playing 49 minutes in a 48-minute game. But the thing that I think is going to hold them back is that center question about Mitchell Robinson has a long history of injuries, and who do they have behind him? Precious Achiuwa.
It's Precious right now. Yep.
I'm sure they'll try Julius Randle at center in some lineups to try and catch teams, and Randle I think can help spread the floor. That's kind of the other question I have, is that a lot of last season for the Knicks and a lot of that run at the end of the season was without Randle. It's almost like you're integrating him back into the mix too. What's the outlook on Randle going to be like, and how he adds or maybe subtracts a little bit from this team?
Yeah. So I don't want to go too deep into this because we've touched.
We don't want the comments to get to us.
Yeah, sure. Last episode, but it killed them having for a team that's had such great luck, and to your point, it finally has a general manager in Leon Rose that shows, or president of basketball operations, that shows an incredible amount of restraint and just built this team the right way. And it just feels like everything that's needed to go right for the Knicks has gone right, except for Julius Randle's health and him missing the last 2 playoffs. Just the valuable information gathering they lost is could be what ultimately cost this team a championship. There's a world where Julius Randle had played at full health against Miami and Cleveland, and the Knicks were all right, this is great. We're like a finals team or at least a conference finals team with this group. Or they could have seen hey, there is simply not enough spacing here. Let's usurp that crappy Celtics offer and go get our boy KP back in town and offer Mitchell Robinson in a first. I think the Wizards might have done that. I mean, heck, you could make a very, I'm not even going to say you can make a case. I think it would be obvious that health aside, which is a big deal, the Knicks would be far better off with Kristaps Porzingis on this team than Julius Randle. That's not to say Kristaps Porzingis in a vacuum is a far better player. I think that's a fun, interesting conversation. I just think the Knicks desperately need a center that, much like Wendell Carter, that can shoot threes and protect the rim on the other end. And if there's some shot creation in there, like it would make them unstoppable. And that is where, like, I have a breaking point with the Knicks beating the Celtics and saying that the Knicks are going to beat the Celtics this year, is that is just such a trump card the Knicks don't really have a clean answer to. And perhaps the best thing they can do, and you just hinted at this, is play Julius Randle at center to close out games. I don't know if Tom Thibodeau has the appetite for that. He showed it a little bit closing a playoff game against the Sixers that they won, with OG Anunoby as the nominal stretch five and Precious Achiuwa kind of moonlighting as the second big there. That puts a lot of pressure on Julius defensively. Offensively, I think those lineups would score 150 million points per 100 possessions. I think they blow the doors off people. But that is sort of like the weird conundrum where they absolutely need Julius's shot making, and yet their best, most balanced lineups this year, it's very plausible, don't feature him. And it's the trio of DiVincenzo, Bridges, and Anunoby around Brunson and Mitch, because then you get that spacing around Mitchell Robinson, you get that skill, you get DiVincenzo. Teams have to guard 30 feet out, where I think the starters, I think it is going to be a surprisingly clunky start for the Knicks this season. How about this, Philip? Maybe we finish up going over some Knicks Magic matchup, because as we're going to get into last year, we didn't really get the full version of that. So let's talk about what that's going to be like and what a playoff version of that matchup would be like.
Let's take another quick break so I can tell you a little bit about our friends over at BetterHelp. BetterHelp is the sponsor of today's podcast. Look, what's something you love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you like? Or is that curiosity, is that desire to learn lost in childhood? Kids are always learning and growing, but adults, sometimes we lose that curiosity. Sometimes we stay a little stagnant. So what's something you'd like to learn? Gardening, a new language, maybe how to finally beat your best friend in bowling. Therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder, because your back to school era can come at any age. They say you should never stop learning. I have been to therapy for a good chunk of my life. It has always helped me sort through the clutter of my emotions, find clarity, and help me push forward and find my purpose and what drives me in life. Therapy can help me. I know it can help you. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, we are back on Locked On Knicks and Locked On Magic. The Knicks and Magic, it was frustrating last year because I just want to see what it looked like, and I was going through each and every one of these games. The second game,
we
Knicks,
got some weird games.
It was very weird lineups. The Knicks, I'm pulling it back up now.
The Magic were the last game before the Emmanuel Quickly OG Anunoby trade in December. They literally traded RJ Barrett and Quickly the day after that game.
That was weird. The Knicks for the second game had everyone but Jalen Brunson.
Yeah.
Third game, the Knicks had Jalen Brunson and no one else. And in the fourth game, the Magic somehow only scored 74 points. They didn't
have Jalen Suggs that game.
They didn't have Jalen Suggs, and Anthony Black and Gary Harris combined to shoot 2 for 10. You throw Wendell Carter in there.
That was the game where the Magic, I think, very much decided Anthony Black is not ready for the playoffs. For our context, we hyped that game up against the Knicks big time. It was because the Magic played the Knicks and the Pacers in back-to-back games. So they played Friday night at the Garden, Sunday night back at Kia Center. And so we were like, this is our playoff test. This is like where we're going to find out if we're really ready. And Suggs missed that game, and everything was just thrown completely off. And it was just like, it was a mess. It was bad. So we didn't get two fully operational battle stations.
Absolutely not. So what do you make of the matchup this year? Because I really want to see how the Knicks respond to Orlando's length. And I wonder if that's a matchup that would push Tom Thibodeau to say, hey, lean into small. We're putting 5 shooters out there, and like we're making these big guys run around and chase, and they're good at that. But versus just like try to match up guy for guy, size for size. And I think the Knicks can win that way just because Jalen Brunson's so good. He can score on a defender as good as Jalen sucks, even if he's going to have some issues with him. Mikal Bridges is still going to be able to create some shots against wings that good. OG Anunoby, like, I think that's such a fun matchup on the wing with the Knicks duo and the Magic's duo. DiVincenzo, like, is going to be chased around by KCP all game. Like, there's a lot of like for like. Mitch is always really uncomfortable, or not always, but like at times uncomfortable guarding out against great shooters. Like KP always gives him trouble. I can't remember a lot of him against Wendell Carter, but I think that's a really fun.
I mean, because Carter's hurt all the time.
Sure,
if I remember correctly,
Mitch is hurt all the time.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, that January game, Carter, that was like his first game back from a long injury or from some time off, and he made an impact off the bench in that game, if I'm remembering correctly.
He made a lot of threes, I think.
Yeah.
But to my point is, like, I just think like for like, there are a lot of interesting matchups, and I think it's a very tight game. I wonder if the Knicks try to throw some curveballs Orlando's way, but maybe you just get swallowed up by the length if you do that. So how do you kind of think the teams match up?
Yeah, I think it's really, really interesting because for both teams, really, they have the ability to switch just about everything. Like, the Magic will be comfortable, putting a Franz Wagner on Jalen Brunson at times if that's the switch that's called for. Like, they'll cross match if they have to. And so, I think you get kind of this like classic 90s style where like both teams rely kind of heavily on isolation play, like Brunson setting up a lot of stuff, Paolo setting up a lot of stuff. Randall will set up a lot of stuff for himself. And so I think it's a really tough matchup to peg. I think to your point, something the Magic do struggle with, and they struggled with this against Boston, is teams that are able to spread them out, 5 out and kind of force them to switch everything because they can't have their low man helping with paint defense. They can't kind of collapse the paint a lot. And they can't like have guys shifting over to like squeeze guys when they get in the paint. Like that's kind of how you break this Magic defense a little bit. You just kind of get them scrambling or get them in a position where they can't cover the paint particularly well. Because again, they don't have that like great above the rim shot blocker except with Jonathan Isaacson. And he's usually guarding a 4. He's usually not guarding a 5. So he's he doesn't have as much freedom to roam around. And so I think the Knicks have that capability to do that. And on top of that, the Magic have to be able to make their shots. Like I think the games that the Magic beat New York, they made their threes. I think we talked in the last time I was on the show about Chimo KK and the big game he had in January. He just made a bunch of threes. And so, like so many things with these big matchups the Magic have, it comes down to, can Orlando make enough shots to stay competitive and give their defense a chance? Because these good teams will be able to break your defense down. Like Jalen Brunson makes tough shots. That is what he does. Like there's, that first quarter from the February game, I didn't think Anthony Black played poor defense that much in the first quarter, but Brunson just came out on a heater, and you could just see Black's Black's a rookie, but you could see Black's confidence just go away. And at that point it's done. You're game over. Where the Magic, I think, had some advantage last year was in their depth. They were top 5 in the league in bench scoring last year. I think they were 4th. They are able to supplement their starting lineup and any offensive deficiencies their starters have with a really dominant bench group. That not only has Jonathan Isaac anchoring the bench defense, but like Franz Wagner plays with that second unit. Cole Anthony can score a little bit and tends to play really well in the Garden back home for him. They have guys who can score off their bench, and that's kind of where they try to even things up with whatever deficiencies they have. It's definitely an interesting matchup because the Magic present so much size, but I feel like the Knicks are one of the few teams that are able to maybe not match it, but defend it or put a roadblock to it. Like OG Anunoby can play up and guard Paolo. Like, Paolo still has a size advantage on him, but OG is going to defend him really, really well.
Yeah, I think that's a fun match. I think it's funny because the Knicks kind of go like for like there with OG having the physicality to go up against Paolo, and Mikal kind of just having like the sheer length and wingspan to match Franz and at least like bother just some of those winding drives that, I mean, I just watched like Josh Hart, who's a really solid defender in his own right, or even RJ Barrett, who's fine on that end at time, like trying to go against them. They're just like, what? Like, did his arm just extend another 3 inches? Like, what's going on? Is he mechanical?
Well, to that point though, like, I think in the previous matchups, when he was healthy, at least the Knicks had Randall on Paolo, and Paolo and Randall, like they're kind of the Spider-Man meme right now. like they score on each other. Like Paolo's still got work to do defensively. He's gotten a lot better, but he's still got a lot of work to do defensively. But Paolo, saw Randall and just, went to town on him. And I'm not even saying Randall's a poor defender. It was just a matchup that Paolo liked. OG, now New York can say, okay, Wendell Carter's going to be at the 3-point line. He's not posting up a ton. We can still maintain our defense with Randall at center, put OG, who's a much more physical player, on Paolo. Josh Hart, who plays bigger than his height, on Franz. They match up a lot better with me. I think Orlando fans would say New York was a matchup that they really liked. Even though they're not saying they're easy by any means, but it's a matchup that they like. Yeah. Now it's like more like this is a matchup that's going to be a little bit more challenging and a team that can kind of tailor what they're doing to the Magic if the Magic are finding some success.
Yeah, I think that is a great point. I think the Knicks bench will be more well-equipped just from adding Mikal Bridges. You push Josh Hart and Dante DiVincenzo to the bench. And I think I've said it a lot this summer, but I think the starters for the Knicks will be surprisingly inefficient and surprisingly like unable to separate relative to their talent. And then I think the bench will come in and blow games open. So it's interesting you say that with Orlando. Like that'll be like those minutes will be something to watch. We still have one star, whether it's Jalen, whether it's Mikal, whether it's Julius for the Knicks, whether it's Franz or Paolo for the Magic out there. And then a bunch of guys who are really freaking good players and like who can get the edge in those minutes, in those moments. I also think, just circling back, like the more we talk about it, the more I'm like, it's going to just be ugly basketball when the Knicks starters are in. I think they're really going to miss Dante DiVincenzo in that starting lineup, like assuming there's no injuries, and his ability to just like sit 30 feet out and say, all right, someone on Orlando, like you're going to have to sacrifice a great defender, and he's going to be out there, and the Knicks are going to be able to play 4-on-4 in some ways. And like with Mikal Bridges, he's like a much better, obviously, with the ball scorer, but you do not have to guard him like that. And there's no one else in the Knicks starting lineup you have to guard like that. And I actually think that could be advantage to the Magic when all the starters are on the floor. So a lot of interesting stuff to go over. Philip, I'm excited to get into the regular season.
Before we close out, you kept saying like,
you know what closeout is a podcast guy.
But you mentioned like, what happens if we see this matchup in the playoffs? I hate to tell you this, we're going to see a high intensity game between these teams in November in the play-in tournament, in the in-season or in December in the in-season.
I forgot about that.
Like,
great call.
It's like we are the last game of the in-season tournament for both of us. And I know Philadelphia is in the group too. It's very possible like that game could determine who advances out of the group. Like it's that game at the Garden, it's circled on our calendar because Magic don't have a lot of national TV games. But that game, I think it's December 2nd or 3rd December 3rd is humongous. At least sitting here in September, but that's going to be if both teams do what we think they're going to do in that tournament, in the NBA Cup tournament, we're going to get a taste of what this playoff matchup is going to be like and how these teams are maybe thinking about things. Depending, I imagine both teams will take it seriously if they have a chance to advance on the last day of Cup play.
I think it's such a fascinating thing because I personally could not care less about the NBA Cup, but I think it was clear, to your point, that players and teams sort of bought in, even if in the Knicks case it screwed them and they had to play Milwaukee 5 times for like they were punished for doing.
So got the 2 seed out of it.
Yeah, I guess it all worked out for us, but I do agree that that'll be one to watch, and I'm excited to see what wrinkles Tom Thibodeau throws out there. I'm excited to see what wrinkles the Magic have because they have some ways they can go. Philip Rossman-Reich, check him out on Locked On Magic, everywhere podcasts can be found, and of course subscribe on YouTube. Follow him on Twitter at Philip PRR_OMD. I'm Gavin Schall. You can throw me a follow at Locked On Knicks. You got to keep track of your rivals. You got to know how they're doing because at some point you're gonna face them.
We're like Tom Thibodeau and Jamal Mosley teams are very simpatico souls. Like it's hard. Like during the playoffs, it was hard not to watch the Knicks and just absolutely love the effort that they play with. And I think most people when they watch the Magic are like this. Like there are flaws, like no doubt about it, but they are just a fun team to play with and an annoying team to play against. And that's honestly the highest compliment you can have.
There's like no one I hate on that team, which is a minor miracle. Anyways, Philip, I'll talk to you soon. We'll catch up during the regular season. Until then, be good. We'll talk to you soon. Locked On Knicks, Locked On Magic. Peace out.
I want to thank Gavin for having me on Locked On Knicks and talking a little bit about the Knicks with us as we get ready for not only the NBA Cup in November and December, big game at the Garden, as I mentioned at the end of the pod, but I love talking with Gavin. It gives a great perspective. It gives a great perspective on our team. We've talked a lot over the last couple of months or so, and I think the Magic and Knicks will be in the conversations with each other for a little bit longer. These two teams are going to be among the top teams in the East for some time to come. Should be an exciting season. Again, we are 4 weeks away from the beginning of training camp. But that's going to do it for me today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. Of course, find me on Twitter at PhilipRR_OMD. Subscribe to the podcast and Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Himalaya, Google Play, Spotify, Odyssey, and all the Filming Signal podcasts to your podcast-enabled listening device. For the latest on the Orlando Magic, be sure to check out OrlandoMagicDaily.com. You can find us there on Twitter at OMagicDaily. And for even more Orlando Magic content, be sure to check out my Patreon page, the Orlando Magic Hub, at patreon.com/Orlando Magic Hub. And as always, thank you for your support. Now that you're done listening to me, be sure to check out the Locked On NBA podcast, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NBA in the description, so you don't need to search. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Like I said, we have a busy couple weeks ahead as we get ready for the NBA season. On our next episode of Locked On Magic, we will talk a little bit about how the Magic round out their training camp roster, maybe what is still missing from the camp roster, what the Magic are going to have to be filling in, and maybe how they can use their two-way spots to fill that little deeper dive. We'll also address some Wendell Carter chatter that's been going on that I think needs to be readdressed once again. And of course, this week we will start player outlooks. I'll start previewing what to expect from Orlando Magic players as we inch closer to the beginning of training camp. So a lot to get to here. Still going to be this will be our last week that we're 3 days a week. Going to be probably Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Maybe I'll slip an episode in somewhere if news breaks, but a lot to get to here as we get ready for the season. But that's going to do it for me today. I want to thank you all again for listening to today's episode of Locked On Magic. For Orlando Magic Daily and Locked On Magic, this has been Philip Rossman-Reich. We'll see you all again next time for another episode of Locked On Magic.